You will not siphon our oceans. Not now. Not ever. Ambassador Draven Holt's voice carried no aggression, but it cut across the chamber like a vibro-lance through frost glass. The moment he stood, a dozen alien eyes turned his way, blinking in unnatural rhythms. Every word he spoke echoed into the stillness, bouncing between carved obsidian pillars and iridescent energy veins running like silent rivers through the council walls. The chamber responded with silence, a deliberate silence, meant to humiliate, to belittle, to remind Earth of its seat at the far edge of the semicircle, near the observation node, where the newest member states were always assigned. Holt remained still, shoulders square in his formal graphite gray uniform, a thin gold band around one sleeve the only embellishment Earth permitted. He didn't blink, didn't waver. Across from him, seated beneath a cascade of floating sigils representing the Vexar block, Representative Threx Meller adjusted the folds of his layered skin. Ambassador Holt, he rasped in a tone that sounded like water boiling on hot stone, the hydrosymmetric lattices present in your oceans are uniquely reactive to quantum flux conduits. You've been told this. And I've told you, Holt replied coolly, that your lattice drives have more than sufficient substitutes available in the outer belt. We have shared mineral scans. We've verified yields. Ambassador Zarn Velith, who presided from the center as council speaker, made a slow gesture with his upper hands, neither dismissal nor acceptance, simply an interruption wrapped in diplomacy. Earth's contributions remain unbalanced, he said, his voice filtered through a low-frequency translator. The collective must operate with shared equilibrium. Draven stepped forward one pace, the chamber's ambient lighting dimmed slightly in reaction to his movement, adapting to human ocular preference. Equilibrium doesn't mean exploitation. Earth joined as a sovereign world, not a salvage field. The ocean is not open for negotiation. The council's stillness hardened into collective calculation. Above the circle, the laser plasma display hovering over the speaker dais shifted its hue, turquoise gradients now etched with council procedural glyphs. Velith gestured again. So noted, he said flatly. The motion for hydrosymmetric resource allocation will remain open until consensus. No outrage, no threats, just quiet reinforcement of a foregone decision. As Holt walked back to his seat, his aide Tarn Vexel stepped into his periphery, a slight lean forward signaling concern. They're pretending this is still debate. They're not pretending, Holt said under his breath. They're paving over the decision they've already made. Thousands of kilometers below, the northern auroras rippled over fractured ice flows. The polar region's magnetic volatility blurred satellite readings, which made it the perfect place for Project Abraxas. Inside the subsurface complex, Fleet Marshal Arden Cray moved through the dimly lit corridor flanked by polyalloy pylons. Monitors on the walls displayed oscillating field harmonics, the patterns cycling like slow-ticking heartbeats. The hum of electrical converters pulsed deep through the reinforced flooring. Status of the harmonic field grid, Cray asked, halting beside a systems console. A technician handed him a readout. Field nodes alpha through delta have aligned. Final resonance tests complete. We're within operational tolerance. Cray scanned the output. Deploy no signal yet. I don't want a whisper reaching orbit until we see final trajectory data. He turned as Lieutenant Varric Sorn entered, hooded coat still glistening with frost. The younger man's breath steamed in the air before he snapped to a crisp salute. We've finished auditing the signal backbones from the Terran outposts at Tycho, Ganymede, and Eros Relay. One of our taps caught a council-disseminated classification order. Cray's brow furrowed. Send it to Holt. Sorn hesitated. There's a phrasing. Sir, they're not calling us a member world anymore. The directive lists Earth as a volatile resource sphere pending compliance extraction. The phrasing's buried, but the intent is clear enough. Cray finished for him. Draven Holt sat in his temporary suite aboard the council's spire, the glass panels stretching overhead, revealing a cold arc of stars and a sliver of the planet below. On his heads-up display, the intercepted directive pulsed in amber text. He didn't speak for several seconds. A subtle ache pressed behind his eyes, the fatigue of containment, not of emotion, but of the growing futility of words. He closed the feed. They're not negotiating, he murmured. Tarn, seated nearby at a secondary console, looked up. They've decided. They never intended to ask, Holt replied. The last 3 sessions were theater. This is enforcement disguised as diplomacy. A soft chime sounded as the room registered a proximity alert, an automated orbital trajectory ping. Tarn tapped to expand it. A council long-range probe has shifted course, he reported. Skimming into geosync, too low for standard pass. Its scan aperture just pinged the Pacific Range. They're making first contact with our oceans, Holt said, voice like ground granite. Without permission, no weapons systems deployed. Tarn offered cautiously. They don't need weapons to test. In orbit, beneath the administrative veil of a Council survey monitor, the probe adjusted its angular velocity, tilting just enough to allow resonance mapping beams to reach the surface. The signal appeared harmless, just another observer, but beneath the Pacific, Dr. Garen Vosky at the Oceanic Research Directorate read the spike in phase energy and knew better. This is not routine telemetry, he muttered. That's a multi-channel penetration scan. They're sampling density gradients from the mantle up. On a nearby screen, a thread-thin beam punctured the digital rendering of Earth's hydrosphere, lighting a trajectory that ended in the Marianas Shelf. He turned to his assistant. Get me orbital intel. Now, back aboard the Council chamber, Holt composed himself beneath a false calm. He had just one more statement to make before leaving. Just one line to fracture the mask they'd all been hiding behind. Standing, he addressed the room again. Let it be known that Earth will not ratify extraction protocols under coercion. Your operational readiness, whatever you choose to call it, is visible from orbit. Your intentions are clear. Ours are immutable. Council Speaker Veleth blinked, not surprised, not angry, merely disinterested. Then Earth will bear the procedural consequences, he said. Holt gave a short nod. So will you. As Holt departed, the light from the spire's upper ring cast long shadows over the polished floor. Tarn walked beside him, fingers dancing across a handheld datapad. They'll accelerate their fleet schedule now. Holt gave no reply. Instead, he looked up through the curved corridor's open dome, past the glow of layered orbital rings and scattered relay stations. Far beyond them, silent in the dark, Earth's final warning systems waited. Crave was already in motion, Sorn was already watching, and beneath the Arctic, the pulse of Abraxas had begun to sync with the planet's heartbeat. Frozen winds slithered across the ice shelf like a restless thought, biting at exposed skin as Fleet Marshal Arden Cray emerged from the reinforced access tunnel. The northern sky hung low with clouded twilight, faint ribbons of ionized light shifting above like the bruised veins of the planet itself. The hatch sealed behind him with a muted hiss. Swallowed by the endless white, he scanned the horizon. No drones, no satellites. No reflections from orbital scouts, just silence thick enough to feel, broken only by the distant groan of glacial drift. Beside him, engineer Rowan Maddox adjusted the spectrum visor on his frost-hardened gear, then glanced at the status node embedded in the snowbank nearby. Field convergence holding. Every pulse locks tighter into the planet's natural harmonics. We're weeks ahead of the simulation curve. Cray didn't answer immediately. His eyes were fixed on the horizon, where the first of the skyward towers rose, spiked antennas sculpted from thermal-tolerant composite, anchored deep into tectonic stone. Beneath their surface, copper and graphene lattices wrapped around crystalline amplifiers, feeding directly into the geomagnetic core. You're confident in the frequency modulation? He asked. Maddox gave a short nod. Resonance shift is subtle enough to pass under Council sensor thresholds, but when we trigger full inversion, their directed energy beams will distort before they impact. It won't block everything, but it will bend the edge off their teeth. Cray exhaled into the cold breath, forming thin crystals that fell rather than drifted. Make sure every relay is synced. No reboots once this net lights up. Beneath the ice, Project Abraxas thrummed with dormant readiness. Its energy nodes pulsed in microbursts, silent to space, invisible to scan, yet coiled like a loaded spring. Inside the command capsule, embedded 3 levels beneath sea ice, Cray entered the uplink chamber. The heads-up displays encircling the control ring pulsed gently with orbit-tracked pings, terrain schematics, and waveform overlays. In the center, a rotating sphere of the Earth shimmered with magnetic current patterns. Bring up Council ship vectors, Cray ordered. The map shifted. 8 vessels marked in Council Green Merchant class, but none registered as trade or supply carriers. Their slow drift through high orbit was too deliberate to be patrols. The symbols reoriented, showing trajectory arcs with shallow descent patterns toward Earth's equator. Cray narrowed his eyes. They're already staging, disguising reconnaissance as diplomatic transport. Maddox adjusted the interface. If they dip another 20 kilometers, we'll pick up their full scanning matrix. We'll know if they're looking for strike windows or extraction points. Cray didn't need confirmation. The data lined up too cleanly. Council tactics hadn't evolved in generations. They didn't adapt because they never had to. Leave our beacons dark, he said. If they want to map us, they'll have to guess. Hours later, at Earth's diplomatic relay in Geneva, Ambassador Driven Holt stood before a translucent laser plasma display, the Council's reclassification directive scrolling word by word, each clause colder than the last. Lieutenant Varric Sorn's voice came through on the side channel, clear but tight. We cross-verified the header code. It's authentic. Internal Council routing mark from the Strategic Compliance Committee. 4 signatories. Holt read the phrase again. Volatile resource sphere. Elevated priority. Compliance extraction authorized under acceleration conditions. They've skipped negotiation altogether, he said. This isn't posturing. There's more, Sorn added. They've deployed atmospheric sensors over 3 Tier 3 worlds in the last cycle. 1 was reduced within a week. 2 didn't make formal protests. 1 doesn't exist on the updated maps anymore. Holt stared at the screen. The room behind him buzzed with quiet urgency. Technicians moving between encrypted uplink channels, diplomatic aides filtering through news feeds, each face strained but silent. Tarn, Holt called to his aide. Pull the atmospheric models from the previous probes. Find me comparative sonar from Earth's oceans. Look for phase beam signatures. Cross-check with our polar boys. Tarn nodded once and disappeared behind a mirrored door. Holt tapped the panel, connecting directly to Cray. Abraxas is still ghosted? Completely, Cray replied. We've insulated the output relays behind boreal atmospheric scatter. Their orbitals can't trace what we haven't lit. They've stopped pretending, Holt said, voice low. Cray didn't respond immediately. When he did, it was with the weight of inevitability. Then neither will we. At the edge of Earth's thermosphere, a council ship designated Verect Voss initiated a slow-burn arc toward the upper stratosphere. Its hull shimmered with refractive camouflage, designed to mimic the optical noise of auroral activity. On board, alien officers calibrated particle lenses toward Earth's Pacific shelf. The scan frequencies pulsed silently, harmless on paper, deadly in intent. But they missed something. A brief interference, a blink in their return signal, suggested magnetic turbulence far stronger than Earth's natural fluctuation. The science officer aboard Verect Voss adjusted for atmospheric distortion, then frowned. Negative phase coherence, he reported. Commander Rireth, a long-limbed Zethelian with emerald skin and void-black eyes, turned slowly. Surface interference? No, it's deeper. Structural, not surface-borne. Buried. Rireth tapped a control node. Mark it for committee review. No alerts. Let the planet believe we remain indifferent. Back beneath the Arctic, Maddox knelt beside a control coupler the size of a transport pod. He ran a sensor strip over the housing, verifying the final seal. You ever think about what happens when this thing goes live? He asked, not looking up. Cray crouched beside him. You mean what happens if it fails? No, Maddox replied. I mean if it works. Cray let the silence stretch before answering. Then the rules change. In a remote channel routed through secure Terran protocol, Holt met virtually with Cray again, their conversation held behind encrypted plasma displays. Maps rotated in slow orbit. Trajectories, fleet density models, energy thresholds. They're accelerating, Holt said. We may not get to part 3 of the protocol. Cray studied the display. Then we run part 4 early. Holt's voice stayed measured. You sure we're ready? We don't have to be ready, Cray said. We have to be underestimated. In the Arctic sky above Abraxas, a lone satellite passed overhead, blinking a faint red as it transitioned into Earth's shadow. It carried no weapon, no broadcast signal, just a single encoded response relay. At 0200 UTC, that relay lit green for the first time. Below, the towers began to wake, not with noise, not with light, but with motionless synchronization. They sang in silence inaudible to human ears, but echoing in magnetic pulses through the core of the world. Dr. Garenvosky rubbed condensation from his visor as he leaned into the viewport. The Pacific swelled beneath the floating lab like a sleeping leviathan, its dark surface rippling with micro-tremors the sensors hadn't predicted. He tapped the control panel, bringing the sonar map into full frame on the heads-up display. A deep frequency pulse had just echoed from the eastern quadrant, sharp, symmetrical, and artificially generated. Station control, he said calmly, though his back had already stiffened, verify external signal origin. Cross-check with orbital input. That came from above, not below. His technician, a wiry analyst named Darren Cray, ran a scan with practiced speed. The results confirmed Vosky's suspicion. A non-declared atmospheric body just passed through sector Theta 12. Trajectory confirms orbital descent. Velocity drop at 60 kilometers. Current altitude 8.3 kilometers and descending. Vosky narrowed his gaze. That's not a satellite. Outside, the ocean reflected the morning sun in broken fragments, disturbed by something just beneath the upper currents. Then the probe revealed itself, a spheroid, obsidian black with fractal ridges shimmering under filtered sunlight. It floated just above the waterline, suspended by field dampers invisible to the human eye. Beneath it, the sea frothed as if churned by an unseen hand. Full lockdown, Vosky ordered. Seal the main lab. Reroute power from atmospheric research to seismic containment. This thing didn't come to observe. It came to test. From orbit, the Council vessel Valdrin's Oath monitored the descending probe through a filtered viewport. Commander Uroth stood motionless as his officers relayed telemetry readings. Initial interaction with hydrosphere achieved, the technician reported. Probe's core is stable. Oscillator has entered frequency match range. Any human counter-response? Uroth asked without turning. None yet. Platform sensors are active, but comms are dark. They don't know what it's doing. Uroth allowed himself the slightest smile, more tension release than expression. They'll know soon enough. 30 meters below the probe, the Pacific floor shifted. Dr. Vosky stared at the seismic readout. It's not extracting anything. It's injecting resonance, like it's trying to make the ocean vibrate. He turned toward the emergency override panel. That's an energy lattice ignition sequence. Seconds later, the water erupted. The shockwave hit the station with a concussive force that folded support pylons like paper. One of the research bays sheared completely from the main frame, vanishing into the sea as alarms screamed across every corridor. Lab modules crumpled inward. Bulkhead doors jammed. Equipment racks came loose, smashing against sealed windows as automated shutters failed to deploy. Vosky pulled himself up from the deck, blood seeping from a cut across his forehead. Containment failed. Tertiary coolant loops gone. Theta section collapsed. Where's Cray? The technician's comm channel was silent. Another scientist stumbled into view, hand pressed against a gut wound. They're gone. 32 were in that section. We've recovered 5. Vosky closed his eyes briefly. He hit the emergency beacon. This is Dr. Garen Vosky at Pacific Station 4. We've been attacked. Not surveyed. Not scanned. Attacked. At Earth Command, President Dorian Wright stood rigid, as the footage played back on a tall vertical laser plasma display. Footage of the collapse, of the sea folding upward in a wall of force, of fragments of research housing sinking like bones. Across from him, Draven Holt watched without speaking. At the table's edge, Lieutenant Varric Sorn stood by with a new intercept. The probe's telemetry feed was linked to a Council relay node orbiting at mid-range. We broke into the return channel. He tapped a panel. Data bloomed in layered visuals. The probe was measuring structural stability threshold parameters for resonance harvesting. It was never designed to collect data, only to simulate a worst-case energy pulse and observe material tolerances. Mass driver calibration. Wright said coldly. They wanted to see how much the ocean floor could take. They got their answer, Holt murmured. And 27 of our scientists paid the cost. What was the Council's response? The President asked. Sorn answered with a flat tone. Official statement just transmitted. The Council regrets Earth's misinterpretation of hydrodynamic calibration activity. Wright's eyes narrowed. Regrets our misinterpretation. They're calling it a procedural field test, Holt added. Under Clause 7 of the Joint Resource Inquiry Agreement. That clause was voided last year. Wright growled. Not in their documentation, Holt said. They're rewriting the treaty as they go. In the upper orbital layer, Council vessel Valdrin's Oath retrieved the probe. Its exterior was intact. Internally, the data recorded full-range seismic reverberations, fluid dispersion rates, and lithospheric pressure variations. Commander Rith reviewed the results silently. Recovery successful, his adjutant noted. No military detection response from planetary authorities, localized energy spike, but no system-wide activation. Then they still hesitate, Rith concluded. File the report under resonance viability. Mark Earth as Category 2 compliant. Back on Earth, emergency broadcasts had been silenced to avoid planetary panic. Only classified channels carried the truth. At the Defense Corps in New Madrid, Cray reviewed the same data, same probe metrics, same impact visuals. He pointed to the oscillator graph. This wasn't exploratory. This was a pulse test. They triggered a sonic reflection. They were listening for fault line harmonics. Engineer Maddox stood nearby, face drawn. If they'd increased amplitude by even 5%, it would have triggered the Cascadia shelf. You'd be looking at a trans-oceanic event. Cray didn't blink. Then the next probe won't just test. He turned toward the uplink terminal. Activate our response tier. No announcements, no alerts, but bring all orbital countermeasures online. A brief flicker of red pulsed through the underground wall strip as the command was authenticated. In the council chamber above the spire, Holt re-entered under cold stares and insincere protocol. Ambassador Veleth didn't rise. Threx Miller didn't acknowledge his presence. I have come not with complaint, Holt said clearly, but with record. Our oceanic platform was destroyed by your probe. 27 dead, facility compromised, and your only response is regret. Veleth's gaze remained distant. Scientific exploration is inherently volatile. Scientific slaughter is something else entirely, Holt replied. Threx flicked one of his skin ridges in a gesture of impatience. Earth overestimates its importance and underestimates our patience. Holt smiled, but the expression didn't reach his eyes. Then I suggest you revisit both. In orbit, Earth's dormant satellites reoriented, minor adjustments, seemingly random, but together the constellation shifted. Not to watch, but to blind. Project Abraxas continued to sink. Orbital patterns adjusted to receive power from polar arrays. In the darkness of Earth's unspoken grief, a line had been drawn. The transmission arrived through an encrypted diplomatic band buried beneath trade registry updates, an innocuous packet tucked inside a frequency too outdated for routine surveillance. The signature was alien, but the structure was unmistakably Terran in format. Envoy Joran Thale tapped the edge of the plasma display, dragging the encoded block into the secure decode chamber. Glyphs rearranged, folding into phonetic overlays. The origin was a defunct relay station in neutral Concord space, signed only with 3 initials and a timestamp 20 years out of sync. The message read, Earth's resistance did not go unnoticed. We request dialogue. Thale exhaled once, sat straighter, and sent a single reply. Location? He stepped onto the shadowed deck of the Careen's Drift, a civilian medical transport refitted with signal jammers and no working registry beacon. It drifted in the crater wake of a dead asteroid. No heat signatures, no active hull lights. Only its docking clamps hissed with life as the ramp descended. Inside, the temperature was deliberately frigid, and the light ran in amber hues non-disruptive to ocular species. 3 figures waited at the inner ring of the meeting hold, each distinct, each scarred by a different era of council betrayal. The first to speak was Zirek Alven, Loreni diplomat, his 4 arms folded in mirrored tension, skin a soft iridescent blue, eyes almost luminescent. When the council stripped Loreni's space of its oceanic worlds, we protested, peacefully. They called it obstruction of equilibrium. Next was Torin Ajevic, a Sauric with mottled green scales that shifted tone as he spoke. We tried diplomacy. They stripped our transport rights and turned our moons into refueling hubs. Our fleet was reclassified. The third figure, Vorlin Krav, Morani's strategist, stood still. His thick fur bore the signs of heat scoring, wounds he didn't explain. We didn't resist, we obeyed, and they took more. Thale let the silence breathe between them before responding. You've watched us since the probe strike? Zirek nodded once. Your planet refused what we were too isolated to challenge. Torin leaned forward. Earth's defiance has destabilized their predictability. That alone makes you dangerous. We're not looking to destabilize, Thale replied. We're preparing to survive. Vorlin's voice was quiet but weighty. Then we'll help you last long enough to do it. From his office aboard Earth's Orbital Defense Command, Fleet Marshal Arden Cray reviewed the latest vector shifts from Council observation ships. The heads-up display tracked them as translucent arcs across Earth's outer layer, curved deliberately to appear routine. Too routine. They're masking a convergence, Cray said. 5 independent vessels moving toward the same high-density orbit path. No coincidence. Engineer Roan Maddox stood beside him, arms folded, studying the acceleration markers. They're staging. Call it survey work, cloak it as logistics, but they're bracketing the planet. Cray tapped a console. The screen fractured into satellite alignments, Earth's own orbital network. In a slow ripple, nodes began to mirror the Council's angles, but with slightly distorted vectors mimicking error margins. It was a shell game in plain sight. Deploy layered formations, Cray said. Make it look like recalibration. They'll think we're adapting our satellites. They won't see we're aligning them. Alignment for what? Maddox asked. Cray's tone dropped. Redirection. On the icy stepwell of the Geneva Annex, Dr. Halvin Strade stood before a rotating lattice of compressed FTL trajectory data. He had rewritten half the Council's exit jump physics over the last 2 months using gaps left behind in discarded scout drone telemetry. It was all angles, no magic, just bad assumptions. They use a single extrapolated range solution for all outbound jumps, he told Holt, who joined him via encrypted uplink, for speed, for reliability, but their gravimetric decoders pull from a fixed pattern set, predictable, which means corruptible. Holt's gaze narrowed. You can fracture their exits? Strade pointed to a spread of intersecting arcs. We can't force them into a wall, but we can shift their signal signature mid-FTL. Their ships will believe they're following stable vectors. Instead, they'll drop out scattered, off-target, isolated, vulnerable. Won't they adapt once they detect the distortion? Eventually, Strade said, but by then they'll already be in the wrong place. In the shadows of Veleth's chamber at the top of the spire, council aides filed quiet reports, their expressions unreadable. Ambassador Zarn Veleth read the latest from the Compliance Bureau. Earth's orbital posture had changed, subtly, and its diplomatic silence in the wake of the probe attack had unnerved even the Vexar delegates. They're not petitioning anymore, said one of his advisors. Because they no longer believe we'll listen, Veleth replied. That makes them volatile. Threx Malor, Vexar representative, flicked his scaled fingers together. Then it's time to move past diplomacy. Compliance protocols must be enforced. Veleth leaned back into the curving shadows of his seat. The protocol is already moving. In a secured transmission chamber within the Council's old outer border, a hidden relay reactivated for the first time in 14 years. The code was old, Earth-based, and signed with a sequence only 5 humans had ever been cleared to use. To all oppressed systems receiving this signal, you are not alone. Earth will not surrender. We ask for nothing except your silence and your eyes. Across the span of minor colonies and hollowed moons, that signal echoed like a torch igniting in vacuum. Jarek Alvin received it on a private repeater built into the ribs of an abandoned deep space dock. His reply was short, eyes open. Back on Earth, Envoy Joran Thale walked with Holt through the vaulted corridors of the Terran Strategic Assembly. Around them, diplomatic aides and military staff worked in quiet synchrony, no shouting, no panic, just focused acceleration. They trust us now, Thale said, because we've bled. They'll expect us to lead, Holt replied. Thale stopped. Can you? Holt didn't answer immediately. The silence hung there, weightless, real. Then came his reply, we're not trying to lead. We're trying to survive long enough for everyone to stop following the ones who kill first and explain later. From orbit, Council fleet scouts continued their slow descent into staged formation. They saw nothing wrong, because Earth had made it look like everything was. Because mirrors, when angled just right, show you only what you already believe. A global transmission was issued in 19 languages and 3 Council dialects. From Earth's central relay array, Ambassador Driven Holt stood before the laser plasma interface, his tone measured but submissive by design, to allow uninterrupted compliance with the Council's oceanic extraction protocols. Earth requests a temporary delay, 14 Terran days, to relocate marine infrastructure and adjust bioclimate stabilizers. This is a logistical necessity, not an objection. We await acknowledgement. No outrage, no defiance, just the slow, bitter echo of a planet folding to pressure, or so it seemed. Minutes later, the Council's response arrived through encrypted diplomatic lattice. 7 days. No justification. No ceremony. Just a numeric ultimatum followed by a formal compliance seal. Inside Earth Defense Corps, the heads-up display shimmered as Fleet Marshal Arden Cray stepped into the tactical well. Around him, technicians worked in tight clusters, calibrating orbital shifts and managing the synchronized motion of over 100 relay satellites, now adopting mirrored orientations. Begin Phase 2, Cray ordered. Deploy Knowles Detachment. Full solar shadow approach. High above the ecliptic, Captain Varric Knowles' stealth vessel, Anvil 6, coasted in dead drift. Every active system had already been shuttered. No beacons, no attitude thrusters, just a skin of ceramic ablative plating, masking any emissions that might betray its position. Inside, the air was cold enough to fog breath. Knowles stood over a tactical cradle, reading the light stream of updated deployment arcs. Confirm mine web deployment. Sequence them according to Corona Shadow Grid. Lieutenant Rusk, his sensor chief, nodded without looking up. 32 orbital mines dispatched, each tethered to orbital decay parameters within the kill ellipse. The targeting plan wasn't designed for destruction through brute force. Above them, the mine web activated. Anvil 6 tracked the moment the first Council cruiser collided with its own redirected gravity loop. The mine hadn't exploded, just flickered once and then pulled. The ship spun without warning, tearing sideways as internal compensators failed. One by one, the tethered mines latched onto exhaust signatures, shifting the fleet further into the Corona's outflow corridor. Noel stood calm as his crew executed coordinated counterfire. "Leave the flagship intact," he ordered. "Let them transmit confusion." Back on Earth, Cray watched the overhead feed. Plasma bands curled across the solar rim as fleet identifiers flickered into red status. "They're trying to form defensive alignment," reported Strategic Officer Bren. "But every correction pulls another ship deeper into the solar well. They're panicking." Holt appeared on a side display, connected through the secure cabinet relay. "They'll retaliate," he said simply. "Not if they don't know who hit them," Cray replied. Holt's face didn't shift. "That won't last." "No," Cray agreed. "But it'll be long enough." On the bridge of Valdrin's Oath, Commander Urath struggled to comprehend what had gone wrong. His comms flooded with damage reports, engine overloads, and solar exposure warnings. "We were misrouted," he hissed. "Earth rigged our exit." Kelthron turned slowly. "They used harmonics, not weaponry. They bent us into our own blind spot." Urath smashed a control node. "This isn't a battlefield. It's a mirror." Outside, the Corona flared again. A cruiser cracked in half. Another lost navigation and spiraled toward the star. In Council War doctrine, this situation had no name, because it had never happened. Until Earth. 3 minutes later, Draven Holt stood in front of Earth's planetary security cabinet. Behind him, the feed from Abraxas played silently, ships drifting, broken, caught between radiation sheaths and slingshot pulls. He turned to President Dorian Wraith, whose expression held no pride, only clarity. "They'll know what we did," Holt said. Wraith nodded once, and when they asked how we did it, Holt's answer was quiet. "We didn't strike first. We just stopped letting them choose the battlefield." Radiation shimmered like liquid glass across the fractured solar corridor as Captain Varric Null's strike fleet emerged from beneath the orbital plane, riding the star's magnetic wavefront like surfers on a cosmic riptide. Their hulls flickered in and out of phase lock, guided by pre-programmed thermal drifts rather than active propulsion. From a distance, they looked like space debris. Null stood on the bridge of Anvil 6, flanked by Lieutenant Rusk and combat analyst Tevan Dre. The laser plasma display ahead of them showed Council ships scattered, exposed, their exit vectors pulled off course by the harmonic distortions Earth had broadcast moments earlier. "Status of the mine web?" Null asked without raising his voice. "Fully synchronized," Rusk answered. "Targets acquired. Trigger points locked to radiation spikes." "Fire pattern Delta V," Null said. "Make it clean." In high orbit, the orbital mine web activated. Not with a single blast, but in a sequence, dominoes of kinetic wake bursts. Each impactor, no larger than a cargo shuttle, accelerated via solar-fed sling trajectories and struck Council ships at angular weak points, rear propulsion, lateral steering arrays, unarmored sensor masts. They weren't designed to destroy entire ships. They were built to disable, to blind, to force error. One cruiser lost yaw control and collided with its support vessel. Another's power core vented into open space, sending it into an uncontrollable roll. Hull panels sheared away like molten leaves. Inside the flagship Valdrin's Oath, Commander Urath tried to re-establish fleet formation. "We've lost the Wrestle and Vodar wings," his comms officer said through static. "Signal degradation across 12 nodes. Central synchronization is fragmented. They're not jamming us, they're making us jam ourselves." Kelthron turned from the secondary feed. "Gravity lensing around the Corona is amplifying our distortion. Their attack pattern is sloped. We're being hit from below, out of plane." Urath gripped the edge of the console. "Redirect fire to the lower angle. Use saturation sweeps. We'll blind them." The gunnery crew obeyed, launching overlapping particle arrays across the lower quadrant. But as the weapons systems lit up, Project Abraxas responded. From Earth's geomagnetic core, a cascade of controlled pulses surged outward. Invisible but devastating, the harmonics fed into the layered defense satellites, which had remained dormant until now. Each Abraxas node inverted the waveform of targeted energy signatures. Directed energy beams from Council vessels fragmented before contact, dispersing into harmless bursts of radiation. The most aggressive ships found their own firebending, scattering, or collapsing into their own hulls. Council gunships designed for clean execution found themselves swatting ghosts in a haze of solar interference. Onboard Anvil 6, Tevan Dre nodded at the pattern emerging on the display. They're flailing. No coordination, no fallback vector. They're still treating this like occupation. Noel watched quietly as two smaller Council corvettes turned abruptly, not to counterattack, but to retreat. They didn't think we'd fight, he said. Now they're not sure how to. He lifted a control key and entered a command. Send forward units. Focus on engine cores. No unnecessary fire. This isn't conquest, it's message. Through the solar corridor, Earth's allied fleet joined the formation. Loreni stealth skimmers, Sorak driftblades, Morani dual-hull rammers, all emerging from cloaked positions scattered through Mercury's trailing orbit. Each species used a different technique, none built for large-scale engagement, but Earth had shown them where to cut and how to make every incision count. A Sorak blade cruiser slashed across a Council warship's dorsal spine, leaving it venting coolant and spinning. A Morani double-rig ship dropped tungsten pods into a vulnerable guidance array, fracturing its comm grid. The Loreni ship, shaped like a crescent folded on itself, released a pulse that confused every navigational signal within 400 kilometers. Inside Earth's Defense Corps, Fleet Marshal Crave stood before the command basin as officer feeds came in faster than the system could translate. Report, he said. Council's mid-fleet has broken off from the lead formation, said Strategic Officer Bren. They're losing discipline. 8 ships attempting vector realignment, but solar interference is compromising navigation. Let them run, Cray ordered. Prioritize those who stay. On the side display, Draven Holt appeared, watching the battle unfold. They weren't built for resistance, Holt said. They were built for compliance. And compliance doesn't train you for chaos, Cray replied. Back in orbit, Wrath's command structure began to fracture. They're targeting non-lethal systems, one officer reported in disbelief. They're disarming us without killing us. Why? Wrath demanded. Kelthron's eyes moved across the sensor feeds. Because they don't want us gone. They want us humiliated. The words hit like gravity. The Vexar prided themselves on domination. Now they were being spared. Strategically. Symbolically. A move worse than destruction. Near the solar rim, a Council carrier attempted an emergency FTL jump. The drive spooled, overclocked, redlining in the corona's heat. Radiation fried the synchronization array. The ship emerged mid-jump in a tangled ripple of space-time, half inside the sun's gravitational slope, half in free drift. It disintegrated in silence. Across the fleet, others hesitated. Not because of damage. Because of doubt. They no longer believed they were the apex. On Anvil 6, Noel gave the order. Cease forward engagement. Let the survivors limp. Rusk turned. We're letting them retreat? Noel said, we're letting them remember. He looked out toward the fading silhouettes of crippled ships crawling toward the system's edge. They thought Earth was still arguing. They never expected Earth to teach. And far below, under the shivering blue glow of Abraxas towers still pulsing quietly beneath Arctic ice, the world held its breath, but made no noise. No cheer, no celebration, just silence. Council Command went silent for 2 hours. Not a broadcast, not a demand, not even denial, just silence, a vacuum where authority had once lived. In the shadow of Jupiter's orbit, the remaining fragments of the fleet drifted aimlessly. Weapons powered down. Formation lost. Some ships spun slowly. Orientation sensors still scrambled from the harmonic trap Earth had sprung. But finally, a signal cut through the dark. On Earth's upper relay channel, Supreme Commander Selrikon Voss appeared on the central diplomatic feed. His face, once broadcast across systems as a symbol of unyielding doctrine, was now lined with resignation. One of his lower eyes was swollen shut from radiation exposure. The others barely blinked. We acknowledge the outcome, he said, voice tight as taut cable. We request withdrawal of surviving vessels under protected designation. We will leave Earth orbit within the cycle. The signal ended without flare. In Geneva's subterranean command wing, Ambassador Draven Holt studied the message on the tall laser plasma display. The room behind him was silent. No withdrawal, Holt said. Envoy Joran Thale, standing nearby, raised an eyebrow. That's not strategy. That's doctrine. No, Holt corrected. That's accountability. He turned to the communications officer. Prepare a system-wide response. When the signal went out, it didn't just target council ships. It was transmitted on open wave, embedded into every trade channel, pirate frequency, relay beacon, and archive mesh. The screen began with a planetary silhouette, then 9. One by one, the names appeared: Jashtari Prime, Eric 4, Morian Drift, Holix Hollow, Tyrethex, Brunus Reach, each followed by footage, satellite sweeps, ground-level images, population charts before and after compliance protocols, oceanic voids, deforested plates, burned exospheres, voice overlays from surviving witnesses, some human, some not. And then, line by line, the data stream opened: council signatures, transport logs, resource export manifests, every document verified, every lie buried in council corridors unearthed. The final line on screen read: "They called us resources. We called them wrong." On council worlds, the effect was instant. In the orbital city of Serelek, a civil administrator tore down the council's symbol from the side of a trade station and broadcast the entire data file to every port. On Xanthile's moons, transport crews mutinied, refusing to load another crate bound for a sector marked requisitioned materials. On Loreni's last stronghold, former ambassador Zarek Alven stood before a crowd of thousands and played the Earth transmission in full. "Our silence was a crime," he said afterward. "We repay that debt by never bowing again." In Morani space, Toran Zevik led his fleet toward a council resource node designated Relay Bastion 9. The defenses had been designed to deter piracy, not rebellion. The battle took 11 minutes. A fusion of Soric disruptors and Morani boarding teams flooded the station, disabling systems and capturing command staff. The final transmission from the outpost commander was intercepted and shared across 5 systems, requesting clarification: why are the Morani attacking a council facility? No reply ever came. The facility was repurposed within the hour, new banners stitched in haste, but not in fear. Back on Earth, in the Assembly of Sovereign States, Joran Thale approached the central podium. His words were not fiery. He didn't shout. He simply read the newly ratified Declaration of Sovereign Accord into the historical record. No planetary system shall be categorized as a resource. No species shall be reclassified by administrative vote. No extraction shall occur without consent, oversight, and mutual governance. Authority without representation is null. We, the undersigned, recognize no dominion by edict. Then he stepped down and left the words to echo without applause. Council Command received it 37 minutes later. This time they didn't respond, but on their internal channels, entire command logs were being erased. Archives were being scrambled. Subcommittees were dissolving. The consequence engine had already ignited. Selrakan Voss stood once again on the council chamber floor, but this time there was no audience. Just flickering projectors, empty seats, emergency lighting. Only 2 of the major blocks had even returned his message. The Vexar refused to answer. The Zenthi Quorum issued a statement of reconsideration pending verification. His own executive aide quietly filed for asylum on the Loreni homeworld. Voss stared at the blank space where the ambassador from Earth once sat. For decades, they had seen humans as a provisional species, emotional, fragmented, chaotic. He hadn't understood the silence. Now he did. They had never been quiet because they were uncertain. They were building, and when they finally spoke, it was after everything had already been set in motion. In the Terran Arc Vault, Holt sat before a smaller console. Behind him, the ocean thundered against reinforced walls, Geneva's climate stabilizer pulsing in rhythm with polar energy. Fleet Marshal Cray appeared on the secured feed. "It's over," Cray said. "No," Holt replied. "It's shifted." He tapped a panel, loading the final reply to Voss. "Council ships may withdraw," the message began, "but not from consequence. There will be no immunity. There will be no erasure of what was done. Return home, and face your own people." He paused before the last line, then added it without ceremony. "You misunderstood. We were never bargaining. We were preparing." He pressed send. In the quiet night above Earth, the Abraxas towers fell still. Not because they had failed, because they were no longer the weapon Earth needed. The truth had detonated harder than any mine, and across the stars, banners that once hung from power now drifted, torn, faded, and finally forgotten. A flare curved across the crimson edge of Proxima Centauri like a ripple pulled from deep memory. The Confederation headquarters drifted nearby in orbital sync, its segmented hull layered in glass alloy skin that refracted light into arcs of violet and gold. It wasn't designed to impress. It was designed to reflect every panel, every etched sigil, a shard of reclaimed truth. Inside its central chamber, the council seat was gone. In its place stood nothing. No throne, no elevation, no command post. Just a stone dais encircled by 12 walkways, each bearing a new crest. 12 banners, none higher than the others. Earth's was among them, a black field behind 3 concentric circles, each filled with star lines. One for memory, one for resistance, one for warning. Dr. Garen Vosky stood beneath the Proxima monument, his hand pressed lightly to the cold surface. The structure spiraled upward like a frozen wind, each strand engraved with the name of a person who had died refusing to distort science in favor of conquest. At the base, 27 names were clustered together under a blue inlay, the team lost during the Pacific probe strike. He didn't speak. The names did. A group of young cadets passed nearby, pausing briefly to bow their heads. Not soldiers, not colonists. Interstellar custodians, trained not to take, but to guard. Their uniforms bore no ranks, just call signs. One of them noticed Vosky and saluted. He nodded in return. "Remember them," he said. The cadet hesitated. "We do, sir. Every time we're told to ask before landing." In a chamber suspended above the orbiting station, Ambassador Draven Holt stood before the assembled nations of the Confederation, not species, not empires, just worlds, independent, scarred, but awake. Behind him, the room dimmed as a projection of Earth rotated slowly over the speaker's platform. It was unarmed now. No satellites in aggressive formation. Abraxas had been powered down and decommissioned, its pieces repurposed into terraforming stabilizers for refugee colonies. Holt stepped to the edge of the platform, looked across the gathered delegates, and began. "We didn't win a war." Silence, he continued, voice steady. "We stopped forgetting we were allowed to say no." He moved closer to the display controls and triggered a shift. Now star maps rotated above them, 9 former council-controlled planets, now shining in green, their status tags marked sovereign, active, open. You may ask how we transformed so quickly from resistance to leadership. The answer is simple. He turned from the display. We didn't. We just stopped listening to the lie that peace requires silence. We spoke, and others realized they could too. Across the outer belt of Marani space, former warships were being converted into patrol stations and relief transports. Torin Zevik's fleets now escorted aid vessels through debris fields that once carried weapons. He wore no insignia now. His ship bore no name. On board, a recording of Holt's speech was playing to a group of civilians unloading modular hydrofarms. Not all of us fought with bullets. Holt's voice said, carried over the hangar's echo grid. Some of us fought by enduring, by refusing to teach our children that weakness was inherited. Torin watched the unloading quietly, then returned to the bridge without comment. Marani's strength was not measured in shockwaves anymore. On Earth, Geneva's coastal sky burned with sunrise as a final ceremony prepared to begin. A memorial arch now stood above the Arctic installation that had once housed Project Abraxas. The original control ring had been left untouched, its faded display still bearing the last encoded pulse signature, one never fired. Fleet Marshal Arden Cray stood beside it, his uniform unadorned. "I was never proud of the trap," he told the young engineers gathered around, "only that it didn't have to be repeated." One technician asked, "Would we use it again if forced?" Cray gave no lecture, just a question in return. "What makes you think we'd wait until we're forced?" The silence after that wasn't fear, it was understanding. As the Confederation Assembly reached its final session, a delegate from one of the former Council vassal worlds asked the question none had spoken aloud. How do we ensure we don't become them? Holt didn't flinch. By writing their crimes down, he answered. All of them. Not to avenge, but to remind. The chamber held its breath as he delivered the final line of his closing address. We were always peaceful, but we were never weak. If you remember nothing else, remember this: we didn't destroy an empire. We revealed its foundation. Then we chose not to build ours on the same stone. On the edge of Confederation space, the transmission beacon known as Echelon Prime pulsed once, then reactivated. Its new message went out in 3 languages. To travelers unknown, This sector operates under the Concord of Sovereign Accord. You will not be conquered. You will not be claimed. But if you take without asking, you will be answered. The stars, once echoes of dominion, now carried two signals. One, a warning. The other, a welcome. And somewhere light years away, a young planet under survey picked up the signal. A single word hovered on its display: Earth. Not a threat, not a myth, but a reminder that sometimes silence only ends when one voice refuses to be edited out. And once that voice is heard, the stars never sound the same again.